When white opens the game with e4, black's most classical continuation is to respond in kind with e5. The central struggle continues after knight f3, developing the knight and adding pressure against black's e5 pawn, so black actively develops while defending the center with knight c6. Bishop b5, known as the Ruy Lopez, is one of white's most established and classical responses debated at grandmaster level for centuries. In this video, we are going to focus on another opening with a rich history and sound strategic basis, developing the light-squared bishop to the active a2 to g8 diagonal with bishop c4. The bishop enjoys an active diagonal, pointing at black's weakest point on the chessboard, the f7 square. If black plays the natural knight f6, known as the two knights defense, this provokes incredible complications after knight g5, piling up pressure against the weak f7 pawn, the subject of another video. To discourage knight g5, black occasionally wastes time with the dubious h6, or develops the light-squared bishop to the somewhat passive e7 square. Both of these moves are well met by striking in the center with d4, developing a strong initiative for white. We're going to focus on black's straightforward, solid response bishop c5, actively developing the dark-squared bishop and fighting for control over the d4 square. Notice that knight g5 is not possible, as this would simply hang a piece to queen takes g5. If white decides to play d3, supporting the center and opening up the dark-squared bishop, this can be met by the natural developing move knight f6. There is clearly nothing wrong with white's solid d3 move, but white is mistaken if it is followed up by knight g5, intensifying the pressure against f7. When you first see this line as black, it can feel pretty intimidating, but black has nothing to fear after castling the king. The point is that if white continues with the premature attack knight takes f7, after rook takes f7, bishop takes f7 check, and king takes f7, black's king may feel a little exposed. But where are white's attacking pieces? White has wasted time to exchange two minor pieces for black's rook and pawn. Although this exchange may be considered approximately equal from a materialistic perspective, the quality of black's pieces promise a more comfortable game. Black already has three active minor pieces developed, enjoying a significant advantage in time. During the early phases of the game, the knights and bishops are easier to handle, as it takes some time for the rooks to find open lines for development. One basic plan for black is to complete development with d6, supporting the center, and allowing the light-squared bishop to enter the game quickly with bishop e6 or bishop g4. Black's rook may visit the f8 square, so that once the king returns to g8, black's rook can enjoy activity down the f-file. This impatient approach is not a good choice for white. When beginners take their first steps in the game, they are advised to rapidly develop, castle quickly, and focus on controlling the center. Countless games have been played in the following way: knight c3, knight f6. Both sides have dutifully developed their minor pieces toward the center. This is usually followed up by quickly castling. When white plays d3, supporting the center and possibly preparing a pin with bishop g5. Sometimes black follows suit with d6, but may also decide to prevent the pin with h6. White may confront black's bishop with bishop e3. Notice that white is not afraid of allowing doubled pawns with bishop takes e3. F takes e3. White's e3 pawn helps support the center, while also opening up the f-file for white's rook. When appropriate, this pawn may also help white expand in the center with d4, so there's a lot more to this story than assuming white simply has weak doubled pawns. Rather than capturing on e3, black can maintain the tension with bishop b6, encouraging white to capture on black's terms with bishop takes b6, opening up the a-file for black's rook. White may continue with the plan of general development with queen d2, supporting the bishop and connecting the rooks, when black may follow in similar fashion with d6, possibly preparing to activate the light-squared bishop with bishop g4. So white can play h3, preventing bishop g4, when black may decide to activate the bishop on the e6 square, confronting white's light-squared bishop, when white may also maintain the tension with bishop b3. After queen d7, we have reached a symmetrical position in which both sides may focus on centralizing their rooks on the d and e files. This is a common way for both sides to play with a basic understanding of opening guidelines. Perhaps you've seen or even played a game or two yourself in this variation. As you gain more experience, you'll realize that this is only scratching the surface of this eternal opening, and there's a lot more excitement and strategic complexity to discover. When white castled, we notice black automatically followed suit. In this slower variation of the Italian game, there can be value in delaying castling. Now that white is committed to kingside castling, black can remain flexible by playing d6, supporting the center and preparing to activate the light-squared bishop. White may invest another tempo preventing this with h3, softening the castled kingside, but if white continues routinely with d3, this may lead to serious trouble after bishop g4, pinning white's knight. White may decide to return the favor with bishop g5, pinning black's knight to the queen. Since white has already castled the king, the pin on f3 becomes quite serious after knight d4. If white continues to follow black's strategy with knight d5, increasing the pressure against the pinned knight, we can see how important it is to castle wisely, not automatically. The immediate knight takes f3 is a good choice, but black can also confront white's knight with c6. If white retreats with knight e3, black can seriously damage white's kingside defenses with knight takes f3 check. But if white decides to double black's pawns with knight takes f6 check, g takes f6. Since black's king remains in the center, opening the g-file will benefit black. White can decide to move the bishop to safety with bishop h4, but things start to quickly fall apart for white after knight takes f3 check, g takes f3, ripping open the g-file, followed by bishop h3, attacking white's rook, so after rook e1. White's king is terribly exposed on the g-file, and since black is not castled, this allows the crushing rook g8 check. King h1 leads to disaster after bishop g2 check, and it turns out white will suffer a similar fate after bishop g3. Blocking the check, but self-pinning the dark-squared bishop, black can exploit the pin by playing h5, threatening to win a piece after h4, attacking the pinned bishop, and trying to unpin the bishop with king h1, does not prevent black from playing the powerful h4. You know it's a bad sign when white's best response is to simply allow black to win a piece with h takes g3, because if white plays bishop takes h4, once again opening up the deadly g-file, black can play bishop g2 check, forcing the king back to the g-file, when black wins white's queen with bishop takes f3 check, attacking the queen while discovering the rook's check on the g-file. As we can see, although castling is generally a desirable idea, making this decision automatically can lead to serious trouble. Rather than castling automatically, inviting a ready-made attack on the king side, white can remain flexible with d3. When playing these positions as black, it's generally a reasonable plan to wait until white castles before committing the king to a particular side of the board. A flexible response is to simply play d6, supporting the center and waiting to see how white will continue. Instead of castling immediately, when bishop g4 may prove quite annoying, white can be the one to first deliver a pin with bishop g5. Black should not automatically castle, as this would lead to similar problems we just examined with knight d5, preparing to damage black's castled structure. Black can challenge white's bishop with h6. If white decides to surrender the bishop pair with bishop takes f6, queen takes f6. Notice that knight d5, attacking the queen while threatening a fork on c7, is well met by queen d8. Now that there's no longer a knight on c3, white may focus on playing c3, preparing possible queenside expansion with b4 and a4, or support striking in the center with d4. Black may counter this by playing knight e7, adding pressure against the knight, and possibly preparing c6 with a roughly balanced game. Instead of capturing black's knight, white can maintain the tension with bishop h4. Dealing with this pin can be quite annoying, but since black hasn't committed to castling kingside, black can disturb the bishop once again with g5, unpinning the f6 knight. The weakening g5 is not a move to be played lightly, and it's important to understand why white's piece sacrifice is unsound after knight takes g5, h takes g5, and bishop takes g5. This can look quite scary for black, especially as white is prepared to play moves such as knight d5 and queen f3, piling up the pressure against the pinned knight. Once again, we can see the value of delaying kingside castling in this specific variation. Black can use the open g8 square to refute white's attack with rook g8. White can reinforce the bishop with h4, intending to play knight d5, intensifying the pressure against the pinned knight. Black may continue with the provocative bishop g4, or defending d5 while confronting white's light-squared bishop with bishop e6. But the simplest way to put an end to white's unsound attack is with bishop b4, pinning the knight and preparing to counter queen f3, with the well-timed rook g6, supporting the pinned knight when white lacks compensation for this unsound sacrifice. Knight takes g5 can be a serious problem if black's king is committed to the king side, but with black's king in the center, white should avoid this move and simply retreat the bishop with bishop g3. Black may continue with a quick bishop g4, or first play the subtle a6, denying white's bishop access to the b5 square, so black is threatening to gain the bishop pair with knight a5. White may respond in kind with a3, extending the a2 to g8 diagonal for white's bishop, when black may continue actively with bishop g4, pinning the knight and preparing to meet h3, with bishop h5, maintaining the tension against the pinned knight when knight d4 is in the air. Black has extended the kingside pawns, which does restrict white's dark-squared bishop, but g5 may also be subject to attack with h4, creating complex play as the kings remain flexible in the center. Knight c3 is less common at grandmaster level, although with proper play we notice there is certainly opportunity to develop interesting ideas. At this point, white may decide to castle. Try to gain more central control by offering a pawn with b4, known as the Evans Gambit. Or rather than developing the knight, the c3 square can be used to prepare central expansion with c3. White prepares to strike in the center with d4, trying to create a powerful two-pawn center. Black typically continues by developing the kingside knight and adding pressure against white's center with knight f6. Instead of defending the e4 pawn, if white is in the mood to provoke immediate complications, then white may continue by striking in the center with d4, confronting black's center. In order to hold the balance against this opening, black must respond energetically, starting with e takes d4, c takes d4. White's two-pawn center can prove quite dangerous. Now that black no longer has a pawn on e5, passive play may allow white to simply push black off the board by advancing these pawns forward, harassing black's knights. It's important to play as actively as possible with the disruptive bishop b4 check. We've reached a complex position, and several videos could be devoted to white's various options. In this introductory video, we'll briefly mention that if white blocks the check with bishop d2, the interested viewer can explore the tactical consequences that follow after knight takes e4 and bishop takes b4. But a solid place to start is bishop takes d2 check. White can recapture the bishop and support the e4 pawn with knight b takes d2. It's important that black does not casually castle or play a passive move, allowing white to stabilize the dangerous two-pawn center. Whenever possible, black should stake claim in the center with the pawn thrust d5, attacking white's light-squared bishop and breaking up the two-pawn center. After e takes d5 and knight takes d5, white now has an isolated d-pawn, but enjoys a lead in development. Now that the center has been opened, both sides should not grow too comfortable leaving their kings exposed in the center. Castling kingside is a natural path for both sides to explore. Another dynamic option to consider is queen b3, creating dangerous pressure against black's center as well as the kingside, which is well met by knight a5, provoking sharp play. If white is not interested in exchanging bishops, one option to play is knight b to d2. This invites sharp complications if black is interested in playing knight takes e4, taking advantage of the pinned knight and preparing to strike in the center with d5. So in response to knight takes e4, white is prepared to first play d5, grabbing space and trying to secure a significant lead in development. Once again, as you're starting out in the Italian, whenever possible, black's most reliable option is to strike in the center with a well-timed d5, breaking up white's two-pawn center when both sides will focus on castling and completing development. The Italian opening has a rich history, and analysis from the year 1620 is still relevant today. An active way to respond to the check is with knight c3. White does not obstruct the dark-squared bishop with this choice, once again threatening to advance the central pawns. Since white's knight on c3 is pinned, it's important for black to fight fire with fire by playing knight takes e4.